Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Hope you guys are doing good. I want to talk about something a little different today, and it has to do with episode 1 of Living World season 4 and with episode 2 hopefully around the corner. I mean, it's almost been 3 months, so I'm kind of guessing. I wanted to look back at Fahranur. Quick disclaimer, Fahranur is the final instance of episode 1, Daybreak. So if you've not played the episode and you want to completely avoid spoilers, now is your time to click off the video. With that out of the way, I can finally talk about what I want to talk about. Now, the content of this video is not going to be about the lore of Fahranur, however that is also very interesting, but more so of how Fahranur, the first city, was implemented. It was a instance where you go in with Ritlock, Canuck, and the Spear Marshal, and you just go through it and you explore and you get the story. And for some reason, I had this wacky, wild idea of what if Fahranur was a dungeon? Now I know ArenaNet has kind of strayed off the path of doing dungeons in a traditional sense. They're more focused on fractals. But for the purpose of using my imaginative powers, I'd like to talk about what if Fahranur was a dungeon. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is one of the main reasons why I thought of Fahranur as being an ideal or perfect dungeon. If you look at the map and the way you actually traverse this instance, it reminds me heavily of old school dungeons that I used to play in other games, and even dungeons in Guild Wars 2. And as you're going along this path, you are encountering strong mobs. They're elites. And in between those elites, you encounter trash mobs, such as Abogas and Awakened and Jacarandas, or Jacarandi, however you want to say it. But just this fact alone, this theme, kind of gave me the impression that, this would be a really interesting dungeon. Now, my only criticism for a 5-man dungeon would be that these mobs were very, very easy to kill. And it would be a very simple fix as to make these packs of trash mobs have more enemies and allow them to have more health or do more damage, or just increase their rank to have a couple veterans in each trash pack. Now, for the bosses, one of the bosses can be shown on screen right here. I'm currently fighting one of my so-called bosses. Right now he's a veteran if you go in by yourself, but in a 5-man scenario, I would expect him to be at least a champion. I would like it if they pushed it to legendary, but you know, being a first boss, I think it'd be smart to slowly introduce people into like a champion and then progress onto the final boss where it's more legendary style enemies. Another portion of Fahranur that I absolutely loved was the bell section, where you have to do this mini puzzle, I would say. Now, for a dungeon, I think having puzzles would be absolutely amazing. And in Fractals, there have been a couple where puzzles are more so a thing, but I think puzzles in Fractals could be enhanced and or incorporated more often. And in a dungeon, I think it is even more fitting. I don't know, I don't really see puzzles as being super fractally. But in terms of a dungeon, I think it would need to be more complicated. I would like to see perhaps a mesmer be ideal, to where you change the mechanic to each person has to pull the chain at the same time to stop the bells. And also I would like to see the bells drop speed increased just a little bit. Now in Fahranur, there are actually some quite difficult so-called bosses, I'd like to say, if this were a dungeon. Take, for example, the second elite that you encounter. There are some mechanics actually. You have to go around and kill the surrounding Awaken where he's leeching off of, and then you have to kill him. And I actually went down a couple times when I went back to grab some footage for this. And I was just playing solo, and I'm like, this would have been really fun if the mechanics were just fleshed out a little bit more, and if it was promoted that it was a 5-player environment, it would have been a great boss fight. It still is, even in a single-person scenario, but I think having that cooperation with friends would make it even better. And I know you can go in with other people in terms of just doing the story. My only problem is that the reward system. And you might have been wondering, throughout this whole entire spiel, what would the rewards be for dungeons? Why would we want to partake in dungeons? Well, person sitting behind your monitor, I am so glad you asked that question about rewards, because I have an answer, hopefully, as I like to try to have an answer for all my questions, but sometimes it doesn't go well. Anyway, for the reward system in Fahranur, if it were a dungeon, much like the other dungeons who have weapon sets, I would also put in a weapon set for Fahranur. And it just so happened that with this patch, Daybreak, a new weapon set was put into the game. And from my knowledge, not many people have this weapon set, because it does require some work. What I would like to do is implement the astral weapons and the stellar weapons. Now this might be a little weird, but hear me out. So what I would do is implement mostly the astral weapons. The stellar weapons are kind of an add-on. So for those of you who don't know, the stellar weapons are the ascended version of the astral weapons, and they're much more flashy and have more particle effects. So what I would do is for the astral weapons, let them be a dungeon reward. Again, if this was hypothetically a dungeon. And it can be either from a currency, from the map currency, or by chance and have a daily reset for dungeons and or weekly reset for dungeons, depending on the influx of how many weapons one would get. And once you have the astral weapons, which are the exotic versions of the stellar weapons and less revered, you would acquire your astral weapons and then proceed to upgrade them as stellar weapons. And by doing this, you'd have to go out into the domain of Istan and farm your Crocorite or your meteors from Crocotorg. And that is how I would pretty much handle the rewards for the weapons. You might also want to throw in a couple unique pieces of armor as more of like a drop chance for bosses. I think that would also just help the matter. And that is all I really wanted to talk about on the topic of dungeons and Fahranur. Now, I really wanted to do this as more of just a mental exercise to see how much I can think of. And also, when you look at it, a lot of the instances that ArenaNet puts into the game could very simply be made into dungeons. And I think, I'm not completely sure, but one major force that might be holding them back is feeling like they need to implement a dungeons team and a fractals team separately, when I think that they could fairly easily be combined into one thing. Now, I really don't expect them to start implementing dungeons. It was more of just something for fun. But I also would love to see a fractal on Fahranur, as hinted in the last episode for episode 1, there was a scarab plague thing starting to happen. And how was Fahranur destroyed? By a scarab plague. Coincidence? I think not. So I think it'd be really interesting to see a fractal on the past Fahranur. They have all the assets, they just have to clean up the place a little bit. But thank you everyone so much for watching. I want to hear your thoughts down below on how you feel about dungeons and fractals in general, and the implementations of more just leisure dungeons per se. But go back and play episode 1 if you want to just catch up on the story and your experience on Fahranur. I'll see you guys in the next video. Subscribe for more content, like the video if you liked it, and of course, comment down below. And I'll see you all in the next video. Bye everyone! Mwah.